So, dear all, dear professor, we are incredibly excited and honored to invite you to deliver the keynote lecture today. Professor Ali Kadri just told me that he doesn't like long introductions, so I erased a few paragraphs already. But Professor Kadri is a leading scholar specializing in the political economy and development economics of the Middle East, North Africa, and East Asia. His extensive writings include, among others, Accumulation of Waste, a political economy of systemic destruction, China's path to development against neoliberalism, a theory of forced labor migration, the proletarianization of the West Bank under occupation, and the list goes on. Currently, Professor Kadri is a visiting professor at Sun Yat-sen University, and previously he was a senior research fellow at the Middle East Institute, National University of Singapore, and has been affiliated with London School of Economics as a senior fellow at its Laboratory for Advanced Research on the Global Economy and a visiting fellow at its Department of International Development. And today, Professor Kadri gives us a keynote lecture with the title De-Development and the Accumulation of Waste Through Wars. The lecture follows a short commentary from the university lecturer Tiina Seppälä, which will pave the way for general discussion and possibility to present further questions for our lecturer. So without further ado, please, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation, I did talk yesterday about what is meant by waste, and then many of the people who were at the lecture yesterday are here today as well. So I'll just make a brief summary of what I said yesterday, and then I continue to speak about the political economic aspects of what is meant by the accumulation of waste. So I'll start with with a sort of anecdotal something, and which is about an illustrated cartoon that there's a conference for dinosaurs just before their apocalypse, and there's Mr. Chief Dinosaur is speaking to the rest of the dinosaurs. And he says that we are sure going to experience something terrible, but we have brains the size of the walnut. So we have very small brains, but we know for sure that we are going to be facing a huge disaster in the near future. And it seems that, the analogy is there with the plight of mankind at this very moment, because we have accumulated so much waste. And what is meant by waste is the premature extinguishing of life, the premature extinguishing of social nature. Both humans and nature are socially, they're dying before their time by socially instigated measures, not because of natural measures. So if we pollute, people die before their time, perish before their time. And if we go to war, people perish before their time. And and in relation to, if social science is to begin with the study of phenomena, of what is observed rather in the broad picture, well, what we find is that so far we have accumulated a tremendous amount of commodified waste. Pollution is commodified, plastic residue is commodified, all the things that we have produced so far, and they're enormous. So if we think about producing any commodity, and you look at the amount of byproduct of waste, it's not a byproduct, it's really the principal product. The waste is the principal product. So for instance, if, the usual example that is given is of the lipstick thing, the lipstick is only probably 5 or 10% useful, and the rest is all things which were paid for and which are going to thrown in the river or something like that, and they're going to cause diseases in the future. And of course, to collect the raw material to make the lipstick and to cheapen the raw commodities by which the lipstick was made in order to ensure profitability. We went to war and basically pressured people by means of violence, which are basically combined as well with ideological indoctrination of sort, or ideological inculcation, that they must give their resources for free, either their labor or their natural resources. So to make a long story short, we have a planet which is awash with things that are of no use to us, and a loss of life which is of tremendous no use to us, a disuse value, so to speak, that we pay for. It's like we're smoking the planet away and we're going to get a sort of cancer in a sense. Now, so social science begins with the study of phenomena. I mean, when we say that a historical epoch, when we want to periodize history and we begin by a historical epoch, we say we're going to observe something that is sort of existing everywhere, not on the margin. Like, for instance, we observe that people begin to work for a salary or a wage, and we say we've entered a new period, the planetary period of wage labor, so to speak, in political economy. And then we must characterize that period with its own laws of development. What causes people to leave their land and work for wages and, and so on and so forth. And so we need to develop laws of development. Now, so if we rewind and go back in time, we find that there has been the buildup of waste that we have now, the wasted lives and the wasted nature. Together we call social nature, because you cannot separate man from nature, their subject-object, and they don't exist apart, because man himself or herself are nature. And therefore, there isn't any place in the world where there is timber and there aren't people living there. There must be people living there, and if somebody is going to go get the timber, he must negotiate with the people living there. What conditions do I have to get the timber, and so on. So when we studied wage labor as a phenomena, we studied wage labor in respect to the product of that wage labor, which was supposedly of use to us, the steam engines and so on, and the cars and the telephones and the computers, which are things which we consider to be of use. But we haven't considered the fact that, for instance, many scientists today, environmental scientists and other scientists, would tell us that there is a gradual deterioration of the planetary social conditions. And of course, it's not very gradual sometimes, because nature does not work like an arithmetic book. It doesn't do things by 1, 2, 3, 4. Things could go out of equilibrium, so we could have a disequilibrium, and as such, things could go really wrong, but they are going wrong steadily as well. So there are two things. So in relation to what could go wrong, or the projection of what could go wrong, that means that today's amassed amount of commodities are really commodities that are of no use to us, but we pay for. We consume them as well. I mean, in the old debates between how in economics and mainstream economics, there was something which is called Say's law. John B. Say says that Say's law says, it's not a pun, but it's that supply creates its own demand, that whatever we produce, there's going to be a price at which the market will clear. The price will fall so low that the market will clear, that basically we consume everything we produce. Now, That was thought of in terms of, if there are shoes in the store, people, will not buy the shoes. Shoes will go on sale, and there will not be an inventory because people will buy all the shoes. But what wasn't thought of is there are many things. The air we breathe has become a bad air, and we seem to pay for it indirectly. Through medical bills or through direct taxation on pollution or whatever. So we do pay for things that everything we produce, we pay for the waste that we produce. Sometimes the price we pay is a sort of implicit price. The prices we don't see. I mean, if I want to buy some commodity on the commodity exchange, any commodity, anything on the commodity exchange, there's usually many prices for it. I mean, there's the price now and then the price in the future, the spot price and the future price. So the price system is a very complicated matrix of interrelated implicit and explicit prices. And sometimes, when it comes to things which are harmful, we say, some say we pay negative prices for them. Some, but it's not really negative, but if one can, imagine a situation where they have trash at home and they want to send the trash away. So it's like a negative $10 to send the trash away and something. So it becomes part of the cost to the household in paying for the trash to go away. So the price system is actually a very complex and interrelated structure. It's not just what we see. There are prices for everything. If wages are the price of labor, then we must think of labor not as the individual abstract homo economicus that actually is on the job, but as the social being, the social individual who is a subset of society. Because there is no one abstract individual. The abstraction is metaphysical. It doesn't reference reality in any way. What references reality is when there is real time and interrelatedness. We look at the person as a family member, as a son, as a father, as a citizen, and a member of the community. And we look at the individual as he develops in real time, which makes it real. Without time, without history, nothing is real. So the mode of abstraction of mainstream social science, when it eliminates time and interrelatedness from the construction of the subject of study, it misses out on a lot of things. It misses out on reality. It creates an abstract, a sort of hypothetical subject with which we deal with, and that's what mainstream social science generally avoids, because it's very complex to think in terms of it's not complex, but I don't mean the word complex from the sense and the complexity. It's difficult. It drains the brain if we want to think of an individual as someone who is related, who has all this baggage that comes with him, and he gets a wage, and that wage is not simply his wage, it's his family wage and his community wage, because he's going to redistribute that. So the wife that is not working at home for a wage, she's actually waged because she partakes in the reproduction of that laborer who he works, and then she partakes in the reproduction of the child, and so forth and so on. And they're all subsets of society, correlatedly so, co-integratedly so. So it's society that produces, and it produces in real time. So the idea that the individual produces, and that's a sort of meritocracy and the skill and so on, that's a sort of mystification of the reality, a simplification, not necessarily, sometimes, but it's a simplification that is meant to mystify the fact that an individual exists, but society doesn't exist. We all know who said that, you see. But that's beside the point. Anyways, so I go back to the, to the idea that there is a complex price system. And there is a complex price system and interrelated in time, incoherent price system. Why? Because we know that everything is sold for profits. I mean, we don't make things to basically, be of use to society. We make things to make profits. I mean, the last thing, there's a butcher in some area, if he sells a lesser quality meat, masquerading as good quality meat, he makes more money. I mean, you know, so if a producer, if a producer produces something without paying for the trees, without paying really for the cost to the environment, without paying to the cost that society pays for the production, he makes money. So the costs of society are related. The costs that society pays directly or indirectly are related to the profits. And this is something that's, you know, it's not much of a theory, really. It's something that we see. And the point is that the relationship between this relationship of profitability, this principal relationship, actually we call it sometimes in political economy, they call it capital, which is the principal relationship. I mean, it could be defined in the various ways. We define capital as a thing that produces, or we could define capital as a subject of the thing that produces, because there is always relation. There is no substance without subject. We must look for the subject. Nothing exists alone, again, you see. And this idea that something exists alone helps a lot so that capital commodifies everything. You know, it wants to sell, it sells at any cost, and it sells for profits if society takes the costs. So the cost of, what are the costs to society? If I make society pay a higher price for my costs, what is this going to do to society? It's going to mean that it's going to have less health and education and less better food and less a better environment and so on. So it seems I make my profits out of the disaster that I impose upon society. And this is actually why systemically and systematically we arrived at the point we are at now. So there is a law. When things occur time and again, and they occur, and as the planet goes from bad to worse, as I said, the dinosaurs didn't know, then there must be a law that explains the necessary development, necessary but not exclusive. There are probably situations where, like every law in science is necessary but not exclusive. Some are more or less exclusive than others, and so on. But when we have a situation which crystallizes in the conditions that we have now, we must question what laws of development we have. Now, on the surface of things, you see the international institutions of development of the environment and so on. They've been saying we want to make the better place forever. There is a rhetoric, which is basically pretty much a rhetoric of, I mean, it's understandable. They probably mean well, right? We don't know, but I mean, whether they mean well or not, I'm not in hermeneutics. I'm not going to go into the guy's psyche and find out whether he's a good guy. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the facts as they are outside of me, as, in object. What is the object that I am studying? And the object I am studying is irrespective of what they said, whether they said we want to end wars, we want to end pollution, we want to end poverty, we want to end something like that. We see a planet that is necessarily, under the laws of development that we have today, headed towards a sort of pretty terrible condition, something like the dinosaurs have experienced, probably in a metaphoric analogy sort of way. So there is, once we put things in that way, it's not, I have, all I'm saying is this is the broad picture of reality that we have. We all know it exists, but it's rarely talked about, that we have amassed tremendous amounts of waste, such that, the very reproductive of humans and social life and natural life altogether, one life, is being jeopardized. And that's systemic and systematic. Well, it's part of, it's systemic because there's a law of development within the system that And so it's systematic because time and again, necessarily, but not exclusively, this is what we are going to have. So we could have points of departure from the trend, but overall the trend is damning, so to speak. And what the mindset, that is, there must be an idea, a ruling idea, a dominant idea that actually from, it's like a store of knowledge, a big dictionary of all the knowledge that we have, from which we draw to reason. Methods of reasoning are the most important things, probably. I mean, we do have data, but in the end, it's the method of reasoning, that how we organize and how we motivate the data in dynamic, real time. That's what matters, because we want to explain change. So you must have a dynamic explanation of change. You must have a law of change. And so what we draw from that dictionary, that store of knowledge, which we call universal culture, because everybody, and across history has contributed to that. Across history, because the planet is pretty much a single factory, really. I mean, you can't, there are some who say we could do without the slavery in the Americas or anywhere else. That's quite counterfactual or hypothetical. It doesn't mean anything. Without the slavery, there could have been profits. Profits are really, 8/10 in one measure, 8/10 slavery. And the rise of industrial capitalism is at least 9/10, whatever. The numbers are a question of, but they are there. And they are there as predicates. They are not there because of question of degree. I think anything can be measured, and it's measured based on how we conceptualize what we're going to measure in relation to its environment. Of course, the ruling ideas and that store of knowledge from which we draw has its own accounting books and has its own units of measure. These are not innocent, I mean, people think that the GDP is an innocent measure or anything. Even the metric system is a universalization of a European idea upon the developing world to draw it into a system of universal trade. So we draw from a knowledge base, which is the product of a universal culture, the product of a universal contribution from a single factory. Some say it's, the world is interrelated for 5,000 years or 500 years. Well, the world depended pretty much on its, since 1500 or the long 16th century, as they say, started to depend more and more on production that is centered somewhere, but the raw materials are drawn from somewhere. So it became literally a single factory with divisions based on national and color and other things that denominate one person as a lesser being than the other and so forth. But that is always what has happened. But anyways, so we draw from and we draw from a method of reasoning that's easy to reason with. We've the dominant method of reasoning and the dominant stock of knowledge, all of which have produced, because there is an interface between ideas and reality. And the interface between ideas and reality is what we see in the amount of phenomenal waste. So we must question all of this. This is a critique of what has existed, because if we started out by saying we're producing useful things and we pay for useful things, well, now we're producing more disuseful things and we're paying for more disuseful things, we're paying for it. And because everything is commodified and the price system is really quite an intricate and interrelated matrix that underline, because if we say everything is commodified, that means everything is priced as well. So the price system, again, is a bit of a nuisance, because it could be implicit, it could be negative, it could be time coherent, time incoherent, it could be now and in the future and all these things. So the price system is as complicated as the social relations that we say we have commodified. And so this whole thing must be rethought. we must reverse the laws of development that makes us, okay, there are people who are going to say, look, we want to do better things, but nothing's going to happen. That rhetoric is not going to lead anywhere if it doesn't address the fact that we are a planet that is headed to be wasted. And there is a law of development that is actually making this waste. And the law of development that is making this waste, again, it's nothing new, but with a bit of ingenuity, we can actually rethink things, right? We know that there is a law of profits, that we need to make profits, we need to cut costs. And as I said, the more we destroy, we make society pay for the costs, the more make profits. And that society is not necessarily a national society. As again, the whole world is a single factory. It's all of global society that's paying for it in uneven degrees. But in the future, if things continue, both the North and the South are going to basically have to pay for it, because it seems that the natural waste doesn't have a passport. You cannot stop it. It will reach anywhere. So it becomes a sort of, at an ontological level, it hits everybody. And it's like the Native American idiom that nature travels everywhere without an identity card. So we must re-examine the law of profits as such. We must really look at it as a situation where we are going to make society pay for the costs of things so that we make profits. And we must question the fact that society has been indoctrinated or inculcated into accepting the consumption of wasted thing, wasting its own life and wasting its own nature. So in one respect, it became a sort of autophagic order, someone, who self-consumes, an autophagia. And that is not something that could have been seen in the 19th century when the political economists wrote, because they thought more in terms, for ideological reasons as well, that the world is going to develop for the better and this technology is going to be useful, but technology turned out to be in the hands of the owner, not in the hands of everybody. And if it's in the hands of the owner and it's meant to make profits, it's going to actually be used as a tool to shift the cost of production from the producer to society, because that's the basis for profits. So the rate of profits increases if the costs to society exponentially increase over time, and you need to increase the rate of profit over time, all the time. And the best way to increase that, if you make society consume and pay for the waste, pay for the cost of somebody else. And I mean here global society. I don't have any society in mind, because this is a sort of, ontological affairs. And because that's the whole planet is, it's like the dinosaurs, they have the same, right? So there is a structure and there is a leading idea that's basically making society consume itself. It is the planet is auto-consuming, and auto-consuming for a price. And from the consumption of the waste and the sale of the waste. Now, there are different degrees of shifting the usually macro policies, international macro policies, the free capital account and the free trade with nations that enjoy no capacity to trade or anything like that, stifle resources and keep the population wallowing in poverty and indigency and so forth. So you have a situation where the whole setup, the whole structure of knowledge that we have is reproducing this condition time and again. It has to be rethought, and the mode of reasoning has to be rethought. The subject of social science has to be rethought, from the abstract individual who is unrelated to the social individual who is society. So we now have a different unit of analysis, and it is and we have to consider it in real time, and we have to consider that society is paying The more society pays, I mean, you know, the more profits there are. There are, you know, I mean, of course, the world is heterogeneous, and there are balances of powers. Like it's integrated through a system of social relations. There are, in the system of social relations, there are those who could mitigate and militate against the losses to both the social order and the environment, but their predicate is always that somebody else in this global homogeneous and, you know, sort of organic order, homogeneous at the level of production, because it's all one unit of production. Somebody else, no matter who does well, somebody else must do worse, because you can only have profits somewhere in one corner of the globe if somebody else is going to do worse. And that's the absolute law of development. In fact, you know, it's what's called the absolute law of capital accumulation. So, but then again, it is what has transpired so far, again, is the fact that we used to call these things value and use value in political economy. Well, now, and the mode of life, we call it a mode of production or of something of the sort. Now, I think it's, you know, for ideological reasons, it's probably better to call these things a waste mode of life, and the law of value is the waste law of value, and because it is a global society in the process of self-wasting. So that's phenomenal. That's not something that I invented. We all know that the scientists, sometimes we know that from you know, many sociologists, that science and the discoveries in science kowtow power. So even physics, I mean, the funding for certain projects in physics usually has a component of you know, of ideas on whether there is something before nothing, the metaphysics of it, you know, it's which is hullabaloo. But anyways, the point is that in relation to science and the attestation of science that the planet is probably not in very good shape. Well, that is, you know, science kowtows power. It's true, but now we have reason. You know, some may say, you know, you know, that we don't believe the scientists or something like that because their interest is in, well, actually they have an interest in saying that the world is heavily polluted, and, you know, the world is in showing that, because it's the more waste we produce, the more things we have to sell, because all the bad things we produce are consumed and paid for, sometimes paid for in negative prices or future prices, but they're definitely paid for because capital totalizes, so everything is commodified. And in that sense, we take, you know, everything is commodified. I mean, if you know, so in that sense, the future, you know, what scientists are saying is actually corresponds to their position and, you know, to their actually to their interest. They actually have an interest in finding out how bad the situation is, rather than how good the situation is, because if it is very bad, then the conditions for production in the future, for commodity production, become more difficult. And in the spot price in relation to the future price rises. So you can have a monopoly power over the pricing system as a result of saying the future is bad. Because you better do things now because the future is awful. And that sort of relationship of the monopolization, the conditions for production in the future are going to be very difficult. So in that regard, all the policies that which are actually ideologically motivated policies, neoliberal policies and so forth, assist society to self-consume, to basically accept, you know, oh, we accept the terms of trade, we accept the terms of the policies. They accept things in general, people. I mean, usually much of them are basically are alienated from the political structure, but it's, you know, through the medium of the representation, they accept the auto-consumption. And so, but again, and then again, that's sometimes referred to as the structural genocide, you know, because I mean, we've all heard the rapporteurs on food, and the rapporteurs on food would say some things which are shocking, like if you count to 4 seconds, something like this, there is one child under 10 who dies from hunger, or something, you know, these sort of images which are quite horrifying. And that there are, like Oxfam would tell you, there's tens of thousands every day that perish from conditions of hunger and disease, which are easily treatable, you know. And we produce for 12 billion people in food. There's a crisis of overproduction. But we are 8 billion and yet we're not fed, or something like this, because a crisis of overproduction are also social. You needn't produce too much for everybody. You overproduce only for the market that you deal with, and that's a glut. That's something that's been talked about in the 19th century as a theory of the glut. And so when you have that conditions, and it's the law of profit that actually directs or commands the process of production, what you have is a situation where you're going to have to basically idle capacity, because there are so few people who can buy what you produce relative to how much you produce. You produce too much, and there are people who are going to not work because the factories are going to be running at 50, 60, 70%, whatever, depending on. But the crisis of overproduction has to do with the anarchy of production, because we don't know what people want and how much people make in the future. Therefore, we are competing with another guy, and the more we produce at cheaper prices, and the more we let society altogether carry the cost of our production, the more profits we will make. That's sort of an arrangement that we have. And that causes the structural genocide, the fact that people everywhere suffer from pollution-related diseases or austerity-related measures. Their incomes are too low to basically have the 3 meals a day or the adequate health care or something like that. And they die way before their time. That's the actual condition. That's something that, been observed in the 19th century as well. The concept is old. It's not something that's... There is always the direct genocide, the fact that there is war. And war, instead of ending people's lives and, instead of them living to the historically determined average, which is qualitatively determined in time, relative to the historical conditions of the time, because time is not comparable with the past. Time is of quality. There are social conditions at this point that actually mean something. At this point, you cannot, it's like apples and oranges, the past and the present. We can think of ourselves, we are different from the past. We are an apple now, we used to be an orange or something like that. And that's the real time is something of this nature as well. So, in this framework, the structural genocide, what it does is it shortens life relative to the historically determined level, relative to the capacity that exists, the science, the technology, the capacity to deliver, to extend life to the historically determined level. So instead of 90 or something, they live to 50. There's a street, and I was talking to a medical doctor the other day, and he says, I'm not sure how true this is, but I mean, but there is a street in Edinburgh, it seems, that it's just on one side of the street, the life expectancy is 15 years higher than the other side of the street, relative to reflect the class conditions of these two. And that's the structural genocide. There are some people who are dying way before their time, unnecessarily, and that's the structure. Now, there is the real, the direct war. The war is pure waste. There is nothing good in war. You just make tanks and invest in people. And then you make machines, war machines, and you hire people whom you've invested in, and you pay them a wage to produce immediate death. And the immediate death that you produced, of course, is evidentially, priced, because there are securities that have been issued to finance the war, and there are rents on the security which are related to war spending, and so. In the interrelatedness of things, the death is priced. And of course, it is in terms of productivity, war is highly productive. I mean, war is something that's not going to suffer from a setback due to lack of demand, because once war exists, everybody has to consume the war. Everybody consumes the results of the war. There is no, and they're forced to pay for it through taxation, through life, through other ways of, because life is also priced, and the shortening of life is a cost-cutting measure, which it goes into the production of other things. And war, of course, is the pure waste condition, is the waste in the absolute term. Then there is, of course, the war is also a pedestal, one of the original stages of production. You cannot, in part, making society pay for the cost of production requires, some form of organized ideological and real violence, and there's a synergy between the ideology and the real violence, and one reproduces the other, because when you win, you make your ideas work, become adopted by the vanquished. The victor is capable of making his ideas reign. And these ideas, of course, they cement and they reinforce this basin of knowledge, this big dictionary from which we draw, and the methods of thought, more importantly, on how we reason the development of things. So war is a more or less an absolute type of genocide, and the structural genocide. And together, if we're going to look for a measure of the rate at which, what social conditions, because you need to change social conditions such that you disempower people from the capacity to negotiate a better living condition, a better environment, the global environment, you need to basically bamboozle, the masses, and you do that with a company, and you never do that, just because you have a good mind and you're capable of convincing people of that. Nobody is going to be convinced that, take away my trees and my air and whatever, and promise me a future full of a dystopian future of sort, if we can continue this way, and I believe that you are doing the right thing. No one is that. The masses are not that ignorant. They are forced to accept this. They are collectively forced to accept this because there is real violence attendant upon that. The real violence is potential and actual. Potential in some places of the world and actual in other places, depending on the degree to which you can always shift the cost of production to society such that the social cost of reproduction and an increasing social cost of reproduction that is paid by society itself, and it's better for it to be over a short turnover time if you have a lower life expectancy for the broader masses around the world. That's a lesser cost of reproduction. And as such, that rate of surplus in disaster that you create is the rate of surplus and profit that you create. So in a social metabolic order, if we think of the global society like an individual who has a metabolism of sort, and he's dependent on sugar intake to perform, the sugar, the energy that the world gets, it is getting from the disaster that are imposed on the global society, both social and environmental. And the more the rate of profit has to grow, the more the austerity and the structural and the war genocides have to grow. And that is something that requires a volte-face, a complete turnaround in the way we think. And the way we think is imposed upon us by systems of empiricism and abstraction that dilute the real, that efface the real from the way things are done. And I think it is probably good. Yeah. So I'll finish. And I think that it's time to basically change the whole thinking order, the methods of reasoning, such that they become more based on our interrelatedness and our existence in real time, on the necessity for collaboration, real collaboration, and the necessity to extinguish the law of, instead of extinguishing life prematurely, social nature, both man and nature premature, to extinguish the law of development that is behind profits, which means if society pays for my cost as a producer, I make more money. That's really the reason why I make more money. I mean, it's like the butcher in the village who sold, cheap meat, which is harmful, but they paid very little for it and something like that. The analogy is weak, but it's there. Anyways, thank you very much I hope I didn't talk too much, and cheers.
Thank you so much, Professor Kadri, for this extremely illuminating intervention. And as a background of peace researcher, I was really glad to hear about the connection between the waste theory of value and war, of course. And I think it's extremely important in nowadays. And next we will have a commentary from University lecturer Tiina Seppälä. Please.
So first of all, thank you so much for this very powerful speech. And I was so lucky also to hear you speak yesterday at the Tiedekulma event that we had. And there we had also other scholars who were discussing issues that are related to our field. And yeah, I have to admit right away that my own background, so political economy, is not my field. So I was trained as an IR scholar, and from that point of view, I was sort of thinking about the conceptualization of war. And as Karim also, so we've been working with peace studies. But yeah, so I think that this kind of existential threats that we are facing and the questions of how we should think and act and be in the world, which is on the verge of self-destruction. And at the same time, I'm considering what has been told and discussed in the fields of, for example, decolonial feminism and ecofeminism, and the kind of critiques that have also been voiced to this kind of more traditional, classical economics and even political economy perspectives and IR, and wanting to see that what comes from there, how can we also broaden our perspectives and at the same time perhaps go back to the roots and the root causes, where also there are gendered perspectives as well as there are the colonial and imperial histories that do make things quite different from this European or even capital-centric perspectives that we have. So, like, how do we sort of then consider what kind of a state of war this is, and what kind of destructions we're imposing on ourselves, to each other, and the planet. And yeah, I would want to somehow to raise up this question and invite discussion and comments also from the perspective of different forms of anti-colonial, decolonial, feminist, eco-feminist struggles and new forms of caring, and thinking about ways in which we can resist this, and also to recognize how we are also at the same time, when we're using quite universalizing language in the academia, so that we are very differently positioned, differently marginalized and differently privileged, and to think about what are the ways in which we as scholars and activists can then try to fight and change this. So basically, that's it. I don't feel I have more competence go into the deep philosophical points of political economy, but I truly enjoyed this, and it gave so much to think about. So thank you. And yeah, I also have open now here the Q&A session for the online participants, so I can see some of the comments here on the chat if people keep posting them, but then we could also take questions from the audience. So I don't know, shall we go in the way that Karim, you can also then
Yes.
yeah. Yes,
Everything.
so thank you.
Everything is great. So please, are you Bon asking?
Okay.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Ali. Maybe just a follow-up to Tina. Tina was mentioning about, actualities, practices about from the grassroots social movement. One of your writings before was entitled, what was that? Resist to exist,
Yeah.
And I've actually known Ali many years ago. I first met him in Oslo 15 years ago when he was a policy person. He was a long time in the United Nations as chief economist for social for Economic and Social Commission for West Asia in Beirut. And when I was a PhD candidate in Denmark and we met in Oslo, he put me in the mailing list, sending his UN reports. Yeah, policy recommendations about many things, right to development and all. And now over time, he went to the academia. He went back to the academia. But probably, and then now with all this, political economic philosophy, what I like about Ali is that he knows his mathematics. He's a mathematical economist. So probably I would like to return, Ali, if you were, because we have 3 sessions on development policy here. Right now, being in the academia, having spent your time in the United Nations, doing policy recommendation, if you were a policymaker, so what would you suggest to counter this self-wasting social reproduction process that you were mentioning?
Okay. Right. Thanks. I mean, he mentioned the right to development. There are, and that was, part of the thing I was, the right of the developing countries to development. That means when they make their policies, they cannot think of social development as a residual of economic development. There are rights to children, to women, to the poor, to housing, to water. And these are social class, right? Not individual. The individual there is a social class. It's the whole society, which is, which works to survive. So you must, in any policy making, the dynamics are the objective function is to maximize the social conditions. And there are several General Assembly resolutions. They're not binding, of course. We know the General Assembly is the United Nations reflects the malevolent side of international democracy, which some have and some don't. And so the point was that the whole argument was to restructure the policy making by saying that the trickle down, that you let the market do what it wants, and then you later, that doesn't work unless you make safeguards to make sure that social rights are. Of course, that requires, above all, a will. When there is a will, there is a way. So it requires a sovereignty, that popular sovereignty, a popular democracy, not someone's democracy and not externally imposed democracy, but a people who transcend their cultural and identity differences in forming a united front in order to cement their demands. And of course, if they do that and they get more and better environment and better health or whatever, and better wages and better standards of living, that's going to basically reduce their costs of reproduction. That's going to decrease profits elsewhere. So it runs against the objective law of development. So if you think about the people who talk about degrowth, degrowth theory, it says, look, if you want to get rid of the problem, you're going to have zero growth. The planetary problem of environmental waste, at least in part. But that doesn't do the trick, because you must do away with the law of profit, because altogether, and the law of profit is something much more social. You must say, we don't want degrowth. We want an end to societies bearing the costs of production for capital. If capital pollutes, capital has to pay. If capital deracinates, capital has to pay, and so on. Because deracination is that, you take people another society has inputted in them, and then you make them seafarers and forced migrants and so forth. And that sort of social cost. Okay. Thank you. So that was, and of course, at a very at an arithmetic-like level, this situation, the solutions are usually quite straightforward in formal thought, because to make the world a sort of better place, speaking of policy, all you need is people committed to making the world a better place and to put back what you've taken out. If you take labor from people, if you take environment from people, you sort of put it back into people. But for that, you need a world which is collaborative. It's not, it says we are all living in one submarine, so to speak, that sinks or rises together. And that's not the case, of course. There are immense, the fact that you create differences, identity and war and structural, is the basis of profit. So, you must actually, what needs to be done is a rethinking of everything. And because because if the social cost of reproduction is the profit rate, the rate of the social cost of reproduction is the profit rate, a measure of which is life expectancy in relation to one measure. I mean, you can do many measures. Life expectancy in relation to the historically achievable level of life expectancy. So if people could live to 100 in the next 10 years, but they're living to 40 and 41 instead of 90 or something like that, then you do have a the profits are going to rise as a result of this, because somebody else is going to bear the cost of production. And if you can imagine that, let's take a Coke can that we buy from the store for $1, right? And well, I mean, there's tin that comes from the Congo, for instance, and there's paint that that's a chemical, and there's oil. There's a whole bunch of things. Just a simple Coke can is sold for $1. Now imagine if the producer has to pay for all the cost, the pollution in the future, because if you throw that can away and, it pollutes, it's going to cause huge, and if you imagine if it pays for the war effort and for the, all the other things, and the lives and cheap labor and the sugarcane labor and all these things adequately, then that can would not sell for $1. It would sell for maybe $1,000 or something like that, because the real price of that can is the profit margin is all the social costs that have not been covered by And this is, you know, that's not just, that occurs at every commodity. The war commodity is the best, is insofar as profitability. It's pure profits and pure waste. And that's something people don't see very often. And it's the war as an industrial process, because war is industrial scale killing. When we say industrial scale, it's an industry. War is a sedimentary, it's a rudimentary industry in the process, in the plan to produce something somewhere, and where causality can become reversible. That means, you know, because I need to produce something in the future, I am here now, I need to do something now. So causality is not simply sort of unilinear in time. You know, the future can cause the present. So war is always factored into the production process as a step in the production process. And so all of these things, when I was working on the right to development, you know, the idea was, but of course there's nothing that could be done. I mean, it's not a strong platform at all, you know, and the rise in consciousness that's going to change things, you know, the issue of how people change their minds to do something better is the $50, $60, $70 million question that no one probably knows because of the contingency of history and the relationship of the mind to practice. We know, for instance, that, you know, we have a sort of a shortcut, a sort of heuristic way of thinking. There are many theories of this, but the shortcut way is that if people practice the right form of political intervention, the right form of struggle, then their experience and the learning they gain from this struggle will regalvanize their consciousness in ways that there is a betterment of things and there is more grounds for collective action and so on. So practice the right kind of practice, the practice that says, I want to be collaborative with mankind, with other man, and I want to safeguard the environment and so forth. That sort of internationalism is practiced. Now, unfortunately, the people in charge of things and profits, they know that this is dangerous, probably. And if you look at the history of how a critical thought has been contained, co-opted, redirected. So instead of becoming an instrument for internationalism, it became a divisive instrument. It reasserted imaginary conflicting identities, and it make useless the laws of development. It's sort of the patterns of development, if you like the word, because there's a systemic pattern of things that occurs all the time. You can call it law, you can call it pattern. It made this idea, this very simple idea. What I've said is, if somebody else pays for my costs, I make more money. So this very simple idea, if I make the world pay for my costs, I'm going to make more money, which happens. I mean, it's actually, that's how, if I hire somebody and I say, I'm going to pay you $50 and I'm going to make $1 in profit. But if I say I'm going to pay you $0, and I may make $50 in profits, that sort of thing. But, the somebody is the social society, global society. And then what is worse, if I say, I'm going to make you pay, this is worse than slavery, and pay for me, right? So I'm going to hire somebody, you're going to give me $50 and you're going to work for me. What is going to happen to that guy? He's going to perish before his time. It's worse than slavery. See, in the case of chattel slavery, there was an inclination to want the slave to live longer so that you get the most work out of the person. In relation to now's immense surpluses and the need for idle capacity, there is a need to cut life short as well, relative to the historically determined level. And that's paying somebody, making somebody pay you $50 to work for you. That sort of thing, you see. And so the way out of things, as I said, it also has to do with the fact that we need to critical reasoning that rethinks the unit of analysis of social science. That is, you know, when we think of somebody, we don't think of the psychological somebody. We think of the parent, of the citizen, of the son, of the community member, and so on, someone who's a product of historical development, a product of the investment that community has put in. So when he goes to work to mediate what the investment society has put in. And if we remunerate that person, we're remunerating society. That's why the wage is called the social wage. It's not really the one-person wage. At least he takes, you know, on a microcosmic level, he takes it to spend on his family and, you know, and then on his neighbors, whatever, and on his community. So it's the idea that I am out of, descendant from outer space and I make an individual wage is completely false. It's not real because it has no time and interrelatedness. And without time and interrelatedness, we have shrunk reality to, or reduced reality to a metaphysical structure, just like the people who say, what if there was nothing rather than something? You know, this hula baloo type metaphysical questions that are meaningless, really. So the way forward, of course, is principally changing the mode of reasoning, changing the logic of reasoning, adopting a different logic to empiricism and metaphysics, a historical logic. Thinking of, you know, that we exist in real time. We're going to be together in real time and we're going to perish together in real time and so forth. And so, in a sense, everybody has to make do with with what they have and contribute in as far as they have, but without collective action and without a collective consciousness that prioritizes internationalism and collaboration and the extinguishing, the demolition of the law of profit. The demolition that, you know, you need to make society pay for your cost to make profits. Without that relationship, things are not going to go very far. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more question. I think we have time for one.
This is cool. I never spoke in a box before. So, assuming that mathematicians are philosophers and that you're a philosopher too, I'm going to ask you the philosophical question.
It's more of a...
And Tina, thank you so much for bringing women back in, because women are the ones who live amidst waste, managing waste, right? So I think the feminist perspective is very relevant for waste studies. So if we're to escape this logic of waste, we're to escape the state, I suppose, right? Since the state is the par excellence producer of waste through war and commodification, turning life into waste. So how are we to imagine resistance? We call it resistance in Latin America. Here I've heard the term liberation a lot yesterday. But how are we to think liberation within the state? And if we are to think liberation beyond the state, how are we to imagine that? And maybe the closing would be, I think philosophy is about that. What does it mean to be human? And to be human outside a wasting state?
A state is a vehicle. It's a form of social organization, and it's a form, and it has a function. The function is redistribution. Principal function is redistribution. Of course, it has supposedly a monopoly on violence and other things, but the function is really distribution to stabilize things in favor of the people who are in power within the state. So the logic of things is you know, if you have decent people who are, you know, nice to one another, and they're represented in the state, they wield power within the bosom of the state. So the form of the state social organization, its ideas, its universality, and all of this is going to be different. It's going to be perceived as a friend of people rather than an enemy of the people. And its function in redistribution is going to cement the collaboration of people together, cutting cost, and making sure that everybody, that society altogether is remunerated equally. Because if the wage is social wage, remember, and that's the principal function of the state, that means the idea of skills and productivity is secondary to the idea that wages should be distributed equally across society, irrespective of somebody working or not. That's the reason why they say sometimes non-waged work like women's work has to be remunerated. The reason for that, the idea, the foundation for this is because wage is a social wage. And when we say the foundation of this, that the wage is a social wage, that means there is at this level of abstraction, there is no, and it's a sort of arithmetic level as well. There is no distinction between somebody who works or a woman or a child or anything. The society altogether earns. It earns a wage and it redistributes the wage to itself in relation to the ideological differences that are constructed between skills and gender and so forth and so on. And if society belongs to the people, then these differences are going to appear in a way to be minimal and such that the progress of all society, you get to a point where, things are better in a sense if the state is that's what I think it is.
Thank you so much, Professor Kadri. Thanks, Tina, for commentary. Thanks, everybody, for participation. Next, we will have a lunch break, and we'll be back at 2 o'clock with working groups. Thank you so much, everybody.
And thank you, everybody, for participation. It was lovely.